Next up, a trio which has helped shine a light on a sexual abuse scandal at a prestigious prep school in Rhode Island. Ann Scott says a 67-year-old athletic trainer at St. George's molested and raped her when she was a teenage student there in 1977. In the years following, she was hospitalized several times, diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and major depression. According to reporting by Bella English in the Boston Globe, Scott filed a lawsuit when she was in her mid-20s, but when the school's lawyers accused her of lying, having consensual sex with the trainer, who, by the way, was 52 years her senior, and pushed to reveal her name in the case, she dropped the suit and moved abroad. Now, decades later, she's reunited with that same lawyer who filed the original lawsuit in an attempt to hold the school accountable. At a press conference today, attorneys said about 40 other survivors have come forward. Joining me to talk more about that are Ann Scott, the aforementioned individual, attorney Eric McLeish, who became known around the world a few years ago after handling Ann's case when he represented hundreds of victims in the Catholic Church sex abuse scandal, and Lawrence Lessig, you know him, advising in this case. He's a Harvard law professor and former Democratic candidate for president. It's good to see all three of you. Can I start with you for a second, Ann? You filed this lawsuit working with Eric, and Eric's an alum, I should say, of St. George's years and years ago. For a whole variety of reasons, you decided to withdraw it, you move abroad. What prompted you decades later to decide to bare your soul to the world?
Well, I thought there might be other victims out there. Eric reached out to me, and he had written to the school in 2012, and the school kept telling him, don't want to talk to you till you have your client, don't want to talk to you. And so he tracked me down, and I said if it will help other victims. I didn't feel the school community was getting the full information.
But didn't you feel after how hard it was the first time and how they abused you yet again, from what at least I read, didn't you say to yourself, I don't want to go through this crap again?
I did say that to myself, yeah, but then I tried to overcome that because I really want to see the school do the right thing, and this time I'm not gonna give up and stop. I'm a lot stronger now than I was before when I dropped the lawsuit.
I want to talk about what the right thing is in a couple of minutes. Not only are you an alum, as I said, Eric, it was your first sex abuse case years ago. After the case was dropped, you looked for her.
Yeah, I looked
for quite a while.
Yeah, I looked for her periodically over the years because we had taken the deposition of the former headmaster, and he had acknowledged that there were other victims. And this was obviously a case, which I knew even more, with more certainty later on, where this guy likely had multiple victims. So I finally tracked down Ann. We had a mutual acquaintance that I met at a Christmas party a year ago.
Decades after the original case.
Yeah, and I wrote to the school in 2012, and basically I said, you know, they wanted to show me their current policies, and I said, look, there are alums that are lying on the battlefield here. They need help. And they wouldn't send out the alumni letter.
I want to talk about that battlefield with you. You and Carmen Durso, another lawyer involved in this case, at a press conference today, said that there are as many as 40 additional victims, at least, survivors, who have come forward. Fill in the blanks if you can.
Well, it's in the last 2.5 weeks after Bella's report came out. We've been contacted by 32 people who are victims. We've been contacted by 50 other alums who are either witnesses or supporters. And then we were aware of 8 to begin with. So that brings the total up to 40. We've got really, I think, a half a dozen calls that we haven't returned yet.
Any of the perpetrators alive?
Oh, yeah, that's the problem. I mean, Reverend White.
What's the problem?
Well, the problem is Reverend White left in 1974, and no report was made to the Rhode Island Child Protection Authorities. He went on to 30 years in private education and parish ministry in Virginia and North Carolina. He's still associated with a parish in
Well, that's a problem. The statute of limitations on rape is, there is none in Rhode Island. So can't they be criminally prosecuted potentially?
These people are talking to the police.
Why are you involved in this? How did you get involved, Larry Lessig?
Well, I've known Ann since college, and I've been an admirer of Eric.
You went to Penn, yes?
I went to Penn.
Yeah.
I admire of Eric and his work forever. I've been in Ann's position as a victim of child sex abuse. I've been in Eric's position as a lawyer litigating to defend the rights of people trying to fight this. So when I knew Ann came forward, I volunteered to help however I could. You know,
you brought up something I was going to bring up in a few minutes. So I'm reading Bella's first story, and there's a throwaway line in the middle that you had been a victim of abuse. And while everybody in the world learned about you in those incredible press conferences, then years later, read about you as a victim of sexual abuse as a kid here. Is that why you were is that the thread that brought you all together, Larry?
Well, you know, the thing that struck me about that experience wasn't, you know, of course the criminal is the focus because that's the person who did something wrong. But important to me was the people who were around the criminal, who could have done something and didn't do anything because they couldn't pick up a phone, or they didn't want to get involved, or they didn't want to ask the questions. And from that moment, my whole focus has been not to be that guy, not to be the person who could have done something but hasn't or didn't. And so, you know, when Anne was willing to come forward and do something in this case, I was eager to help however I can, because schools have got to learn how to do the right thing, not just at the time of the criminal action, but many years later when they know something has happened and they know they need to do something else.
I want to talk about the right thing. Is that what's driven you? I mean, not just through this case and the pursuit of this woman through the years, but through the hundreds of cases that you did when we had no idea what your earlier life had been like?
I don't know. That's a really complicated question. I mean, we'd have to really talk to my therapist about that. But what Larry says is correct. I mean, here it's not just decades-old allegations. There was information provided to the school about some of these guys in 2004, 2006. Elementary school principal who was a victim said, you got to do something about Coleman. And then 2011, they gagged a Gibbs victim again. And then 2012, I wrote to Peterson. This is not the way most schools have handled it.
Gibbs had been
Yeah,
the trainer.
the-
Can we get to what? I'm sorry. Ann,
Yeah, the bottom line is there are 7 staff perpetrators,
Ex-staff.
ex-staff perpetrators.
Alleged perpetrators, yeah.
None of them were reported when there was knowledge of abuse.
How many are
and
alive?
all of them went on
4.
with an open door.
And then 4 students, too. So, as Ann said, none of it was reported, but this continued on into the 2000s under the present school leadership. That's very different. Deerfield, for example, they sent out an alum letter within 2.5 hours of hearing from the first report. And this is what schools should do, and they haven't done that.
But that's what we're
for
talking. What is the right? I mean, they did send out a letter to
Yeah.
alumni. What is it that you were happy with, at least in the initial go round? In fact, we asked them to come tonight. They
Yeah.
declined. They did send us a statement. Here's a little piece of what they had to say. We recognize the long-lasting impact of sexual abuse. Are dedicated to working with survivors to aid them in healing from its painful aftermath. We also commissioned a third-party investigation to learn about any and every instance of sexual abuse. You're shaking your head back and
Yeah,
forth. Why are you
yeah.
doing that? Oh, yes, Ann.
So I did say in the Globe article I was encouraged about the Mental Health Assistance Fund that they had announced. Since then, we've learned that as a condition to getting reimbursement for therapy costs, they first asked to sign a non-disparagement and a confidentiality clause. They've since backed away from that, but nobody knows how the fund works. Nobody knows how to get reimbursement. No one's gotten reimbursement from it. It needs to be very user-friendly, easy to access for people who can't go through a lot of bureaucratic hoops.
How about this? It used to be called, I think, an independent
Oh, yeah,
investigation. Now
that's
it's
why I
third
was
party.
shaking my head.
What does
Yeah,
that mean?
yeah.
Well, it wasn't an independent investigation because Mr. Hannum, although I know him to be a person of goodwill, his law partner was hired by St. George's to protect their legal interests. So now they're changing the language, and I gather they're moving on to another law firm. But look, those words mean nothing. They have to pick up the phone and call Larry, me, or Ann and start working on this today. And every hour that goes by, they need to look at their own mission statement and realize we're looking pretty hypocritical when we talk about compassion because we haven't shown any.
Larry, when you talked about your own situation, we only have a minute left. When someone like Ann has the courage to stand up and talk about a story that obviously is incredibly painful, what's the impact of that? What's the trickle down and trickle out impact of the Ann Scotts of the world?
It gives incredible courage to other people who are in similar positions. I mean, you know, one of the hardest things is recognizing that when you say this, it's going to affect your life and it's going to affect the life of many people around you. And seeing others who have had the courage gives people courage to step up and do something. And they need to have that courage because many people need help. They need psychological help. They need to figure out how this has affected them and how they can deal with how it's affected them. And that takes incredible strength. And people like Ann, I think, are giving that strength.
You've helped a lot of people, Ann Scott. You know
Thank
that.
you.
don't
A lot of them are in the shadows, but she's speaking out in the sunshine, and that's
Well,
what makes the difference.
All 3 of you have spoken out in the sunshine, so it's really good to see you. Ann, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Great
Good
to
luck with
meet you.
everything.
Thank
Eric,
you.
thank you. Good to see you again. Larry, you as well.